2 bars. You should get something. You're live.
So it says we're live, but is it going to be?
You might just need a moment to.
Yeah. All right.
And when you don't want to do it anymore, if you feel it's not to your liking, you just click on end stream.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
You're much better.
Talk tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. So, and I am Deanne Decker, supervisor of the checklist that have been since 2008. So it's been a couple of years. I worked as a teenager on a number of different elections for political parties running at big events and things like that. So I got going in election stuff relatively early. My parents were involved. So the first thing I'm going to start with is we did put some of the supplies out on the tables. These are the pens that you're actually going to use at the election. So please make sure that anything that was put on the tables is left on the tables. So we're going to pack it all in the box so that we can use it at the election in January. So we're going to talk about a number of the different roles and what sort of how they tie together and what are things that are different about some roles versus other roles sort of as we go through. This is a very similar, it's actually the same slideshow with a few tweaks that I did via Zoom before the 2020 primary election. So it will be familiar to a lot of you. We're going to do some handouts and you can write on anything that we give you and keep that so that you have your own notes and everything else. So the election workers are sort of two parts. There's the elected election officials, and then there are election officials. And they're different because some are elected and some are not. Okay, so in the morning or when you start your shift, everyone needs to go to the ballot clerk table, find the sign-in sheet, find your name tag, and be sworn in by the moderator or the town clerk. This is for people that have not been sworn in for a 1 or 2 year term. For the assistant supervisors, it's a 1 year term. For election, for ballot clerks, it's a 2 year term. And you'll know which one you are. But when in doubt, go and get sworn in so that we make sure that everybody gets sworn in. And make sure you sign in so that we know that who's there, and also we can make sure that people get paid. Make sure that you you sign in today. It's been going around, and make sure you do a new W-9 for 2024. Dawn has some. We've been doing them today to kind of get ahead of things, so it's not quite so hectic on the day of the election because it's going to be very busy. So election officials, the elected election officials are the moderator, John Fermel, the town clerk, Lori Anderson. The deputy town clerk is appointed, that's Alana Kenny. The supervisors of the checklist, myself, Deanne Decker, Ruth Ann Fuller, Sandy Neff, who was here this morning. You'll see her on most things as Sandy Dow or Alexandra Neff. She goes between the two. The Board of Selectmen are elected election officials. They are Ben Bartlett, John Moran, Matthew Sherland, Tim Dabrio, and Steve Welch. And then there's all of you guys that work the elections. You're election officials, you're just not elected election officials. So these moderators, the assistant supervisors, and the assistant town clerks might have, and you guys the clerks. So greeters and outside monitors are also election workers. We may not have a ton of outside monitors. They were, we did a lot of that during COVID. We may need some people because you kind of have to keep an eye on the outside and everything. But that job is usually being sort of handed off to the Board of Selectmen. All right. So any questions? Let's make sure that Sue signs in. This is Sue Levinson from the school board. Anybody does it now? So Sue, we are being recorded. Okay. All right. Any questions about election officials or elected officials. Okay. So morning and evening procedures. You may be happy to know that if you work in the morning, you no longer have to count ballots. The town clerk is counting the ballots. They've been pre-counted by the company that we get them printed from. And having that third set of numbers became a little confusing at the end of the night when we're all tired. So the decision was that you guys don't need to do that. So there's plenty of time to do, some of the other things that need to be done. This ballot clerk checklist log, at the beginning of each checklist, there's a log. If you are assigned to that checklist, please sign that log so that if we have any questions, we know who worked on that particular portion of the checklist. After the fact. If you're just sitting down for a quick break or whatever, not as important, but if you're assigned to that portion for your shift, please make sure that you remember to do the log, and it'll be at the beginning of each section. We're looking to split it out into either 6 or 8 sections, make them a little bit smaller, really get people moved through. We're expecting big turnouts this year, so we want to really kind of facilitate things going as fast as possible. Of course, that's going to depend on staffing. So ballot clerk table supplies. As you can see, the table supplies that you would have out are the things that you would find on the ballot clerk table. Each table needs one set. We really need somebody in the morning and again somebody in the evening to be responsible for making sure that all the tables have the things that they need, and then at the end of the night, collecting everything and putting them neatly back in the box so that we can use them at the next elections. Typically what happens, because we're tired at the end of the night, everything's just going to get jumbled in the box and we have to sort it out afterwards. It'd be a whole lot easier if somebody took care of that at the end of the night for us. So please use only the pens that we provide. These Sharpie pens are archival ink and non-smear. We are required to send the official marked checklist, which is the one that you're working on at the election, to the archives in Concord. And having non-smearing archival ink for the archives is really important. We can make a photocopy of it to maintain here, but we have to send the original up to Concord after we're done with our work with it. So please, and it also makes it a lot easier for us at the end when we're doing our work if all the ink is consistent. You would be surprised how having lots of different colors and everything else like that gets a little confusing, when we're trying to do our work at the end. And so please use the pens that we provide. So the things that need to go on the table is one of these black Sharpie pens, a ruler, the red pens, a yellow highlighter, this orange binder, which has in it a whole bunch of things you're going to need. But you must announce your name, and for a primary, you must announce your party. These are in the orange binders, and these need one per election. So the party one for the primary for January and September. This is the one we're going to use for that. For town meeting and the general, it's the one without the party. So this should go in front of the person that actually has the checklist, because it's instructions for the voter. So those are in the orange binder. Please wait to be called signs. Those will be on each table. There'll also be an orange cone a little bit back from that. And the people at the door are going to send people to the orange cone. When you're done with one voter, you invite the next voter up. Or if we're doing absentee ballots, somebody may step in real quick, do an absentee ballot, and when you're done with that, then you call the next voter. But that way, we're going to try and keep people, fed into the lines as quickly as possible. The letter signs that show which part of the alphabet people need to go to, and then your colored folders. So you have 3 colored folders: a green, a yellow, and a purple, and they correspond with colored forms: green, yellow, and purple. They're each one different. So if somebody brings one of them to you, you put it in the folder and you keep it in the orange binder. If I go too fast, just stop me too. Lonnie's eyes are going to glaze over because she's seen this. Yeah. Oh, this is the part that you missed.
I'm going to leave that for now.
Okay. She wants to get.
I'm not leaving because she's
All right. So the challenge voter table is the next table that needs to get set up. So the CBA table has the camera, the purple form. So it's for the people who don't bring a photo ID. Rather than sending them home to get one or out to their car to get it or whatever, we have a Polaroid camera takes their picture. We do the form, and then that becomes their ID, so that when they go to the ballot clerks, that's their ID, and they can just use that. That needs to be maintained with the rest of the records, so that would go in the purple folder. Things that go on and that table is, so if you go in the gym and the supervisors are just off to the right in front of the bleachers, that table is right there by that front door, by that first door. So the things that need to go on that table, and Ruth Ann made some signs for our bins. And one of the signs is what needs to go on each table. So you'll know if you open the lid, right on there, these are the things that go on the ballot clerk table, and these are the things that go on the challenge voter table. So the camera, batteries, and film, stapler and staples, clipboard and pens, the forms, which are purple, the voter ID explanation page, which everybody has. You're required to give that to somebody that fills this out. An orange religious exemption form, which we've never had anybody fill out. And also the alpha voter list, which is this yellow binder. So it's this yellow binder. And so we produced this alpha voter list. It's the same list that is the checklist, but this is public information where the checklist is non-public information. So that is at that table. So if somebody's like, I'm not really sure if I'm registered or not, you can go look in that book. Or if somebody says, I'm not sure which name I'm registered under. I got married. I'm not sure if I changed my name on the list. You can look in that book to see, A, are they there at all? And B, what name? Do they need to go to do a name change before they go to the ballot clerks, or can they go straight to the ballot? So that book is right there. One of the things that we did the last couple of big elections is we've made that list available to the assistant moderators and the greeters on their devices, the PDF on their devices, so you can search really quick on your device rather than going to the book if you're down the hallway or whatever. So we're going to try and do that again this time. So I just need to be reminded. So these are my scribes over here. All right, ballot clerk procedures for the primary. You all have a copy of that in front of you. This is a legal document. It's written out by RSA. So everything in here needs to be followed by law. It's not suggestion. We will have inspectors come from either the AG's office or the Secretary of State's office, and they come to make sure that we're following all of our procedures right, from registering people to check-in people to absentee voter people, all of the different pieces. There's a long list of things that they require us to make sure we're doing correctly, and they are allowed to ask you questions. So if you have all of a sudden somebody standing over your shoulder watching what you're doing, and they go to ask you a question, take a quick glance back and make sure they have a badge on, because they can ask you questions. And if you know the answer, great, you can answer. If you don't know the answer, just tell them you don't know the answer. Don't try and fudge it or make something up or whatever. Just tell them you don't know. There's no harm in not knowing something, especially we had a couple of people this morning that have never worked an election before. They're not going to know some of the answers that some of you that have worked a lot of elections before may know. So just let them know that you don't know. So we're going to go through the procedures, pretty much step by step. If you have questions, stop me and ask me. And as you can see, I have places to stop and find out if there are any questions. So this is the procedure document. You'll notice it says primary on it. There's a separate document for a general election that we'll send out to you guys before the town meeting, because the town meeting uses general election rules, not primary election rules. All right. So it has a bunch of information, including the voter ID law that we're going to go through. So before voters are allowed in the voter checklist line, a greeter should ask them if they're a registered voter and if they have their photo ID. If they're a registered voter, they can just go straight to the line with their ID. They're already on the checklist. They can just go straight to voting. If they're a non-registered voter that needs to vote, those people are going to come to the supervisors. So the assistant supervisor is going to have a lot of the forms on a clipboard. They're going to be in line, in the hallway and whatever, helping people kind of get the process started so that when we're ready for them, they've got a bunch of it ready to go. We have a cheat sheet on what things they need to be able to register, what documents and things like that we have on the clipboards. And so that way it'll help facilitate us. The last primary, we registered almost 300 people. So in the 2020 primary, which is the election we had in 2020, because we didn't have the rest of them until the end of the year. So, but that one we registered a lot of people. And so this worked really well. And then the next group of people is people who do not have photo IDs and need to go to that CDA table. The caveat to that is that if somebody doesn't have an ID, but one of us can identify them, they can go straight to the ballot clerks and they don't have to do the photo ID. So we'll talk about that when we get to the CDA portion of the training. So before allowing the voter within the area, within the guardrails, ballot clerks shall, which means you must. You just must. Ask the voter to announce his or her name, domicile, address, and the name of the party. So some people are like, why do I have to say that? Because the RSA, which is the law, says that you must. So that's why we put this in front of them on the table. And if anybody has a question about it, you can just say, well, that's the law. That's what you have to do. We also may have challengers and observers. They are they have their own checklist to see who's, coming to vote and whatever. They need to be able to hear it. And anyone that is working an election or at an election, especially people who are Nottingham voters, have the ability to challenge someone. If somebody comes in and that they've moved to Dover and they're there to vote, you can say, excuse me, you no longer live in Nottingham. So you don't tell them they need to go to vote in Dover. You would call the moderator over. There's a form to fill out for challenging a voter. But that is absolutely your right and role in doing all this. But then we have some official challengers that may be there that have been sent by the parties that have special rules and everything. They are allowed to ask you questions. They are not allowed to interrupt your checking somebody in to vote or impede somebody's ability to vote unless they're asserting the challenge. Right. And the inside of the chains, if you think about the gym when it's set up, we've got the tables set sort of this way, and then the chains are around the outside. When a voter is in that channel between the tables, they're not yet in the polling place. It's not until they have their ballot, they step past the end of the tables, that now they're within the chains and in the polling place. Okay, so that's the inside portion of the chains. There was a great suggestion was made this morning that we have signs that we put on the chains to let people to not climb over them and to not take their ballot outside that area. Because if they have gotten their ballot and they're inside the chains and they leave that area with the ballot in their hand, that ballot is null and void and they do not get another one. So it's also super important for you guys, even though you're super busy, doing all the things you're doing, just to kind of keep an eye on people going in and out, making sure that all the flow is going in one direction. And anybody that tries to go the opposite direction, you stop them. I'm sure you guys. Yes. So I work with dogs. We do a lot of body checking with dogs, and I will body block a voter walking through. I literally just plant myself. Don't move. You're gonna lose your right to your ability to vote if you take another step. And they kind of look at me off the flag. shout from the other side of the room. I'll really try hard to not do that. I promise. I can't promise that it won't happen though. I want people. I don't want people to lose their ability to vote or to cast that ballot. So I'm just very strong about it. So I just just tell me back. I'll admit it if it happens. So when they're standing there before you, ask them to announce their name, domicile, and the name of the party in which they are registered. If they are registered undeclared, they're going to tell you. We'll talk more about you. So ask an undeclared voter desiring to vote in the primary to announce the name of the party. And there's an RSA that they must do that verbally and publicly and loud enough for people to hear. So they don't need to shout, but they do need to say it out loud, not in a whisper like they're embarrassed. So search the checklist, find the voter's name and address, and again, read the voter's name, domicile, mailing address, if any, and party affiliation out loud as they appear on the checklist, always loud enough so that challengers can hear. Check this is just duplication. Check the spelling of the name. Everybody, for the most part, is handing you an ID that has their name on it. Look at that and check the spelling of their name before you say, I can't find them on the checklist. Because we've got a number of people in town who their name doesn't sound like the way it's actually spelled. So look at their ID and find their name on the checklist. And if there's a misspelling, that's something that you'll be able to correct. All right, so this is what a page of the checklist looks like. It's different than the Alpha voter list. It has some non-public information on it. So you've got your check boxes over here for when you're checking them in. You have your CVA box. So if they give you one of those purple forms, you're going to fill that out. And then we have barcodes over here, which are basically their voter numbers. Those barcodes are what the supervisors use at the end of the election in order to scan their election history. So that's those are the barcodes. So this checklist is a non-public document. The Alpha voter is a public document because this has non-public information on it. We make sure that I will say good morning. We make sure that they get the sign-in sheet, please. Thank you. All right. So this is what the page looks like that you're going to be working with. So if the voter's name is on the checklist, place a ruler under the voter's name and address and make a check mark in the box next to the correct name and repeat the name aloud. It is actually the law that you must use a ruler. So please use your rulers and make sure. If you're the person that has the checklist and somebody's beside you that's handing out ballots, please make sure that they're paying attention to who you're checking off, because they may catch that you slid down a name, or that there's a couple of people with that same name and you need to make sure you find the correct one. And repeating the name aloud before you check it off is super important to making sure you just checked off the correct name. All right. I keep wanting to point over here, but that's not. So the check mark is the first mark you make on the checklist, and the only thing the check mark means is that the voter stood in front of you. It doesn't mean anything else. The first thing you do, the voter stood in front of you. In a primary, there will be times when it's the only mark you're going to make on the checklist, because the next thing that you're going to ask them for is their party affiliation, and there are going to be some that say, I don't know why it says Democrat. I've never been a Democrat my entire life. I've never voted Democrat. I don't know why that's like, and they get agitated. So with those people, you call the moderator, and the moderator will then send them to us. So we bring all of our records and we do everything that we can to make sure that people can vote. But the deadline is 60 to 45 days prior to the primary. So that deadline is long past, and there's not anything that we can do about it unless we find that we made a mistake somewhere. And that doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. So, and in that case, those people may not get a ballot. And so that may be the only thing that's there is the check So Richard Bomer stood before you, put your ruler under his name, and you check him off to say that he actually showed up for the election. So directed voter whose name is not on the checklist or is reporting any information change to the supervisors. So these would be people who you can't find them on the checklist. They have significantly changed their name. They went from Jones to Decker, or this morning I was Decker to Jones. So any of those kinds of changes, send them to us. We're actually missing, believe it or not, quite a bit of information on a lot of people that have been in town a long time, driver's license information, birth dates. So by sending them to us, we're able to collect a lot of information that we're missing. And that way we can have a nice, clean, correct checklist. So when the voter returns after, for instance, changing their name, write the new name in red ink above the old name of the voter. So if somebody comes in who's doing a name change, you send them to us. They're going to fill out a whole new registration form. We're going to send them back to you with a form that shows they came to see us. And it's at that point you can make the change to the checklist. If it's just a spelling error, that you can just do yourselves. Or if somebody's adding junior or the third or something like that. If it's not something substantial, you can do that right there on the checklist. But anything else, they need to come and see us first. When the voter returns after registering to vote, write in the voter's information wherever the moderator has instructed you to add election day registrations. So election day registrations, we have to handwrite them onto the checklist. All of those pages are in one binder and at one table. So all new voters are going to go to the same table. They're not going to go to a table based on their last name. They're all going to go to the same table. We're going to handwritten it on the checklist, and then from there we'll put them in the appropriate places after the fact. But they're all going to go to the same place. When we divvy out the voters to the tables, we take the table that has the least amount of voters on their list, and that's where we put the new voter list. So sometimes it's at the beginning, sometimes at the end, sometimes it's in the middle. It kind of moves around based on how we break the checklist out. And so that's up to Dawn based on the numbers that we kind of give her when we split everything up. All election day registrations will be added to the checklist in the book at one table. It has the letters, but then it also will say new voter, and we're not moving that list around this year. This is what the list looks like. It came up earlier that this page has more spots on it than the one that we get directly from the state. So we will be updating and using the correct one. This has everything on it there. It doesn't, so we'll be using this one. We don't want to be missing things like CVAs and out-of-state driver's licenses. So you would neatly print, and it's one name per line, and you do not skip any lines. It's just one name right after the other. If you fill one page up, so let's say the letter A ended on page 46, this would be 46A. If you needed a second page, it would be 46B. If you needed the third page, it would be 46C, because they're identicals. So on the new registered voter list, please write legibly their party. That's the party that they're declaring for that day. For a primary, there should not be any undeclareds written on there. It is their party. Their last, first, and middle name and suffix if applicable. Their domicile address. You know, I'm incorrect on that. I just backed up. When we count the checklist, we have to count Republican, Democrat, undeclared, the two Republican, undeclared. So we need the undeclared. Sorry, I'm thinking out loud here. We need the undeclared.
Just like in the checklist,
Just
undeclared, and then
you
party above
put it right above it. Okay. So yeah. So you may put undeclared and then write the party above it. Write in a state abbreviation if they present an out-of-state driver's license for identity. And then check the CVA box if the voter signed a challenge voter affidavit. going to go through all of that as we kind of get through things. So any questions so far?
If you have to, if somebody misspells their name, or it's misspelled in there, and it's just an E instead of an A, do you do that in just regular ink? Are you supposed to do that in red ink?
Any corrections to the checklist are made in red ink.
Okay. That was just
Yep, in red ink. Yep, excellent. Any other questions?
I don't know if this is a question, but just a hint. So when you're checking that checklist to find that voter, if it's the last photo on the page, it's always nice to look at the next page to make sure, especially some of these families, they don't know who's saying it. If it's the
Yep.
name, but with a dad or a mom, it could be the same as one of the children, so.
Yep, that's a really, really good point. Check the next page just in case.
And you put the check after you check their identification.
The very first thing you do is put a check mark in the box. So they stand in front of you, they tell you your name, you find it, you put a check mark on their name. Yep. So the check mark is always the first thing that you do. Yep. Okay. So as the voter, if the domicile and mailing address are correct, if there is one. If the domicile or mailing address is not correct, and the current domicile is still within your same town, write the correct address in red ink above the current address and ask them to go see the supervisors after they vote. So you're going to write it on the list, they're going to vote, and then you're going to ask them to come see us so that we can collect any other information that we may be missing. It's like a lot of road changes. All of those road changes we've already done, but they may say, you can still send them to us if there's anything that they need to change. So here, Richard Bomer, we had him at 13 Fort Hill Road, and he was actually 15. So that's just a correction. So you just cross out the old one and write in red the new address above. If the domicile address is not correct and the voter's current address is not in Nottingham, inform the voter that they are not at the correct polling place and encourage them to go to their correct polling place and use election day registration. Direct these voters to the moderator, and Dawn will help them figure out where it is they should be going to vote. We have a list of all the polling places that the state provides, and so she can help them figure out the address of the correct polling place. We did have this happen at the last election. Somebody came and it should have been in Northwood, and he was in Nottingham, so we found the information and sent him back to Northwood. In reverse, we had somebody that had lived in Nottingham and was on our checklist and had moved to Kingston, but hadn't registered to vote yet in Kingston. He went to Kingston properly to register to vote, and they turned him away and said, no, you need to go, you're registered in Nottingham, you need to go to vote in Nottingham. He came to us and were like, but you live in Kingston, you need to go register to vote over there, and they wouldn't let him register to vote. So we had to call the state, talk to them, and they're like, yep, just have them vote, and then document everything and send it to us, and we'll let Kingston know that they need to be doing things correctly. That was a big anomaly for us. We'd never done something like that. So, but we do everything that we can to facilitate people voting. We want people to be part of the process, so we try and not make it easy necessarily, but we find ways to make sure that they're going to legally vote. Only once. So mark the party choice of an undeclared voter on the checklist using the first three letters of the name of the party, so DEM for Dem, REP for Republican, or and you do it in red ink above the undeclared. We only currently have Republican and undeclared. I know that there are at least 2 candidates that are planning on running on the general election ballot in November with other parties. But right now we only have the 2. So here's Penny Beaumont. So she's checked in. She's got a check mark, a nice tidy check mark. and she wants a Republican ballot, so we just write it. You don't cross off the UND, you just write the initials above it in red as neatly as possible. A voter may only cast a ballot for the party they are listed as affiliated with on the list. So if they're a Democrat, they can be primary. In September of 2020, the deadline for that election will be June 1st. So after June 1st, there's no party changes. So there's not anything that we can do. Send all party questions to the supervisors. They're usually pretty angry. And we do our best to make it so that they don't stomp out. If they don't cast a ballot, we will let them fill out paperwork to change their party, which we'll do after everything's over. But if they want to change, if they want to cast a ballot, even if it's a blank ballot, they cannot fill out party change paperwork on it. So, yeah, so this is the RSA here that says that voters may not vote in primary if they're going to change party.
Right.
Name on the ID. If it says Deanne Smith instead of Deanne Decker, that's my use the middle initial. It's or I'm sure her license or not who the person is. So it's very important that gets put in. You may see that even on a new one that can use out-of-state driver's license. Right. So for a registered voter without a photo ID, and we need to make sure we talk about provisional ballots. Ask the voter if the moderator, clerk, or any supervisor knows the voter well enough to verify the voter's identity. So it's moderator, clerk, or supervisor. Assistant moderators, assistant clerks, and assistant supervisors. We can all have the same authority. We can all identify someone and become their ID. You notice who this does not include? Ballot clerks and select board members. You guys cannot identify someone, and neither can the select board. If yes, ask that official to verify the voter's identity, and then you make no additional check mark on the checklist at all. We don't have to at all. They just go on and vote as if they had presented you with the photo ID. The law does not authorize ballot clerks or selectmen to verify identity, so that's the RSA. Oh, the RSA says RSA twice on it. If the moderator, supervisor, or a town clerk do not know the voter, then that person needs to go to the CBA table. And you'd be surprised how many people go, oh yeah, I know the town clerk, and the town clerk is like, they see so many people that people think that they know who they are, and unfortunately the case a lot of times. So this person must complete a challenge voter affidavit, which we call a CBA. It's the perfect one. If the voter presents a signed CBA with an attached photo or a CBA with an attached orange religious exemption form, put a check mark in the box on the checklist in the CBA column. So new voters may also, so new registered voters may also, in some cases, have a CBA. These CBAs stay with the supervisors and the town clerk. We have to track them. So here's poor Penny Beaumont. So she forgot her ID and a CBA. Now, so then this and the religious affidavit go in the purple folder in the orange binder. So the orange religious exemption is for someone who says, for religious reasons, I don't want you taking my photograph. And so if they don't want you taking a photograph for religious, they fill out this form, you attach it, it becomes their photo, and that goes with it and stays with it. Now, voters who come in to register to vote, who do not have a photo ID, are going to be casting what is called a provisional ballot. This is a new law, and that provisional ballot is something that is handled by the moderator. And so we, as supervisors, would go through the full process of registering. We would take their picture, they would fill out the forms, He would do everything. And then at that point, we would go and get the moderator. The moderator would then take that person, provide them with the ballot, but that ballot is going to be tracked. And the way it's going to be tracked, Dawn's going to explain.
I get a lot of envelopes and envelopes. So essentially, they're giving their ballot to me. At the end of the night, I do record their vote. However, I do have to place their ballot in an envelope. They, within 7 days of casting their ballot here, I will hand them an envelope when they're done voting. They have to return to the state that proves that they are who they said they are when they came in to register to vote with us. If they fail to do that within 7 days, technically their ballot. So hopefully it has not happened yet. I know, such a mess. So, there are times where we have some pretty close elections, so I doubt that we will ever have a handful of them that would make a difference, but that is how we handle it, so that nobody can come in and really pretend to be something that they are not. Their vote will get uncast.
So it's just one more check and balance for.
And that is for someone who comes here, they are unregistered, they're not on our checklist, they're unregistered, they don't have an ID, and myself being here and not identified. So it's a pretty great.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty rare. Yeah. So, okay, and then those pieces, because they're very new, are not in this presentation, but I will be adding them to the presentation. So document issuing a ballot to the voter. So this is that strike through the name. So use a ruler or straight edge to mark a single thin line through the last name of the voter on the checklist. This requires a second look at the voter's name, and the use of the ruler ensures that the correct name is marked. Strike out only the last name of the voter, and do it as they receive the ballot. This line tells us the voter received the ballot. So at this point, they come before you, you put a check mark in the box. You've done all these other steps. Sometimes you've sent them away and they come back. You've done all these other things. The very last thing is that person steps to the next person and is handed the ballot. That's when you strike their name out, and not until. So you do not, as you're talking to them, check and strike, check and strike. It's check, go through the process, strike the name as they get their ballot. Okay? If someone forgets to strike the name, it leaves a question for us: did they receive a ballot? So, especially in a primary, it's very up for question, because did that person leave because they, didn't want the ballot? But if it's an undeclared voter and there's a check mark and then there's a party and it's uncrossed off, we can kind of guess that person probably got a ballot. Why? There's not really any reason why they wouldn't have. But a person who is with a party, has a check mark, and there's no other information, that's a pretty clear indication to us that for the most part, that voter didn't vote. So we did have the situation at the last election where people had voted and people had checked them off and gone through the process, and then totally forgotten about crossing the name off. And then I sat and I watched as they went back and went, oh, and they started crossing names off, and I went over and went, what are you doing? Like, oh, well, I forgot to cross all these names off. Well, okay, so now you're just going to every single check mark and crossing them off. How do you know those people actually got ballots? And so in that kind of a situation, if you forget a few and then you go back, please, please, please fill out an explanation sheet so that we know that that something happened with those voters, and please list their names, because we have to track a lot of this information for the state. So it's really super important that you follow, and somebody from that's an inspector could be standing there watching and asking you questions, not while you're working with the voter, but afterwards, and making sure that you're following this properly, because this sheet is the law. Okay, so here's Penny again. here's the line through. Because we provide you the pens, the consistency makes our job a lot easier after the election, that everything is the same color and everything is the same weight and that kind of thing. So now you're going to give the ballot to the voter for which they declared their party. At this point, when you give them the ballot, if they're an undeclared voter, please remind them to sign the undeclared book, for the return to undeclared book, before they leave. So there will be a book with all of the names of all of the undeclared voters on that day at the end of the, by the doors as they exit. And if they find that book, find their name, circle what party they cast a ballot with and sign it, it allows us to put them back to undeclared after the election's over. But if they're like, no, don't have time, I gotta get the kids from daycare or whatever, and they don't change their party, and then they miss the deadline because they think they're all set up, always been undeclared. Now they're stuck with a party that they may not want to cast a ballot. So that's how that typically happens.
This switch to undeclared wherever the student has a party on that day, or
Nope, there's no changing. So nope, we cannot do any of that stuff at a primary election. The 2 elections next year, we cannot. 2 elections, we can do it. Yep. And there's a voter lookup tool on the state secretary's website that is actually a little bit, it's not the most user-friendly thing, but you can look up your party on how you're registered to vote to see what party you're for.
Now, at a primary though, if you don't vote, you can fill out change of party.
So that's the only exception is if you come in, you're a Democrat, you don't want to cast a ballot, you want to go back to undeclared, we will fill out that paperwork, we set it aside, we do that very, very last before we finalize the election.
But you can't vote.
But you can't vote. You can't even cast a blank ballot. You can't cast a ballot at all. So once the voter has the ballot, allow the voter to enter the space enclosed by the guardrail unless challenged as provided for in RSA 65927. The moderator will handle any challenges. If you're working as an assistant moderator, please kind of keep an eye on the number of people within the chains because the law says you can only have as many people inside the chains as you have booths. And that includes people checking out and at the book to return to undeclared. So if we have 37 booths, that's the maximum number of voters that can be within that area at that time. You hold the line, wait for a few people, especially if like machine jams. That's the famous one, machine jams. We try to put through a bunch of absentee ballots that are folded and doesn't like it. So that's typically when it happens. So, but just kind of keep an eye. If it looks really full, just kind of ask people to hold things up a little bit until things clear up. Any questions?
If you go back a couple slides, and I know you can use this one on training. But
Tell me
you
when.
have where you checked off the last name here, and then the next slide. No, go the other way. No, yeah. Well, no, go to where you checked off the approval part, and then the next slide says give the voter the ballot, but shouldn't this one come first? Give the voter the ballot and then check it off.
Well,
Just for training purposes.
so it should. Yeah.
Okay.
This ballot, but because of the way the filling out the doing the scenario
Because
work.
the next slide then says once they have the ballot, but I just thought it might be confusing because you sent it to us and we know it, but if someone's just reading this when you send it out.
So
that
those
might
two
be-
things sort of happen simultaneously. So yeah, but you are correct. Yeah. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. So let's talk about absentee voters for a minute. So absentee voters, in addition to the check mark and the thin line through the last name, they also have to get marked AV, not AB. So absentee voter, not absentee ballot. If you have a Board of Selectmen sitting with you, it's an absentee voter, AV, in Reading to the left of the checkbox. So you're going to put it to the left of the checkbox. You can see how crowded that area gets, and which is why keeping this really clean helps us after the election when we're tired. So it's an absentee voter. It's important to record all the required data on the checklist so that the supervisors can fulfill their duty under law to enter all of the information into the statewide voter registration system. Robin will tell you it's been eye-opening the last 6 or 8 weeks on how much is done after the election, and when there's mistakes, how time-consuming it can be to try and figure out what happened so that we can properly input that information. So it's I think she was a little overwhelmed initially after the election.
It's important to have that read so it sticks out to us.
Yes.
Looking for all these
So
things.
this is an example that the state put together of some of the things that you may see on a finished page of the marked checklist. So address changes, name changes, things that are struck out, CVAs, out-of-state driver's license. They put like a little bit of everything into this one area. And so this is an example that isn't stuff that you would need.
Can we, like, the ballot clerks have this, like, next to them so they can keep references?
So it's there, it's all in the binder.
Okay.
It's all in the binder. And we'll make sure that everything is updated with the latest stuff. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the voter ID law, which is the other handout that we gave you. The proof of voter identity instructions is super important for the people who fill out a CBA because the state's going to follow up with them, and this form tells them what's going to be required of them from the state when the state reaches out to them for them to prove their ID. So it is required by law that anyone who fills out one of the purple forms is handed and goes home with one of these sheets. So they're all together on that table by the door. So the big question is that people ask all the time is, what type of ID will I need to vote? So a driver's license from any state, a driver's license from the federal government or the military, a non-driver ID issued by any DMV, whether it's in New Hampshire or otherwise, a photo ID card that says for voting identification only, that's issued by the DMV. Lori gave out the first one of these vouchers for this free card. So we are very likely going to see this card at our next election. It allows them to go take the voucher to the DMV. It's usually $10, but this voucher pays for it. What? Oh, jeez. Bye, Bonnie.
I came in this morning. Because she said, I'm leaving.
Yeah. So a United States Armed Service Identification Card, the United States passport or pass card. You guys have seen the U.S. passport cards that looks like a military ID. Typically what I use for my ID. It's a passport, but in pocket size. Doesn't allow you to do everything, but for getting and stuff like that. And then a New Hampshire student ID card, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. And a photo ID not mentioned above, but determined to be legitimate by the moderator, supervisor, or town clerk. So if you get a photo ID, and you have a question about it, ask one of us, and we'll say yes or no. Most of the time, we say yes. Go ahead and accept it, as long as it has a name, a photo, and a date, either initial date or an expiration date. Those are 3 things it must have in order to be something that we will allow. If any person authorized to challenge a voter does so under this provision, the voter shall be required to fill out a CBA. So if somebody comes in and says, I don't have my ID, and one of us identifies them and somebody stands up and says, I'm challenging that, that person is required to fill out a CBA regardless. If somebody has an ID that somebody, they can't even see it, but they could challenge the ID, the person may have to fill out a CBA. And we haven't had that happen, but it's one of the things that a challenger is allowed to do. And those challengers can sit within 4 feet of you guys when you guys are checking people in. So they're going to be right there. You're going to feel like you're on top of you at some points if there are people sitting there.
It's how it hasn't happened, but I wonder if it's possible that a challenger could actually be there to disrupt things. So what if they just challenge what he's
So I think you're on to something.
And it did not happen to us, but it did happen to
During our special election. So there are different types of challengers. There are official party challengers that have an official letter from the party. They have to bring it to Dawn. They give them certain additional privileges, but they are there to support and be there for that party.
And those I do try to let you know. And those people who hang out most of the day and they're pretty respectable, but they will be a little nosy sometimes.
Yeah.
Or seem nosy, but they're
And they're not allowed to interrupt you while you're actually registering someone. They cannot ask you questions and impede the flow of people voting. So they have to wait until you have time if they're going to ask you questions or whatever challenges. We've had a couple of them. So I think are going to be the ones that have the potential to be disruptive. And we may have to have, we always have police presence, but we may have to have them.
And if it's repeatedly happening, I mean, I'm gonna know really anyway when there's a challenge voter, but the sense that someone is there to take care of that.
Yeah.
It won't be bad for you guys.
So, so that's the CBA. Verification of the voter's identity by the moderator, supervisor, or checklist of the town, not the ballot clerk. If any person authorized to challenge a voter does so under this provision, the vote. Oh, just took that one. Backwards. So student ID cards. Acceptable student photo ID cards must be issued by a college, university, or career school approved and licensed to operate in New Hampshire, or a public high school, non-public high school. So we have a number of high schools that our kids go to that they may bring an ID from. But again, it must have name, photo, and date. So those are three things. There's a lengthy document that the Commissioner of Education puts out every August of all of the schools. We printed it at one time, and it's really big. And so now we'll just keep it on PDF, and that way you can search it if you need to. But usually we look at it and we just say yes or no.
We've seen Monza, like Nottingham NH
I mean, even the badges that we made for our election. So it hasn't been done. So any of those things will be acceptable. College or university operated by New Hampshire. The expiration date, the issuance or expiration date cannot be more than 5 years. So, if they got it as a freshman and they've been out of school for a year, that's within that 5 years. If they've been out of school for 2 years, they don't have another ID. That's no longer an ID. 5 years after the issuance date.
Question.
Uh-huh.
What if it's a student ID and the voter was 65 years old?
So, could that happen?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely could happen. So, and if it's expired, then it works for them because they're over 65.
So if they're presenting something like that, it doesn't really have their birthday. You get lucky if you have their license.
Right. No,
Over
we're not.
65?
No, we're not allowed to ask.
Just keep asking, do you have a different ID?
Yeah. Let's see.
We just asked the school, yeah, like 24, 24,
We know when it was issued. It was issued that year, that school year. Yep.
University.
So for school IDs, they must be schools in New Hampshire. It cannot be an out-of-state school. Yeah. So that would be an exception to the school ID. Is it must be an in-state school. Yeah, whether it's high school, college, or whatever, it must be an in-state school. We're not taking any Dartmouth. Dartmouth off these. We would take Harvard. Photo IDs. Yeah. So, and the name on the ID shall substantially conform to the name on the of the individual on the checklist. So again, if it has an S rather than their middle name, that's fine. If your first name or last name has changed substantially, then send them to us and then we'll send them. If you have any questions, see poster number 5. That's actually the poster number of the document that is hung in the hallway. There are 8 posters. Okay, so there's a number of posters that are posted throughout the polling place that we're required to post. And they have the majority of the information, but unless they're been on a really long time they don't really read them. Okay. So new voters that come and register to vote, they're going to fulfill all of that information to us. Once they've done that, they fill out a green voter authorization form, and this form is what goes to the table that has the new voter book, and this is where you get the information to write onto the checklist. Okay, so the new voter comes to you and they do not have one of these, you send them back to us because either somebody forgot to give it to them or they haven't really registered to vote yet. So they must be handwritten from this information onto the list. This form actually gets attached to their voter registration form after the election is kept together. It's always green. And guess what color folder it goes in?
But the ballot, but it goes to the new voter book, so those don't go in the binders anymore.
The green one does go to the one in the red binder.
In the red binder, but not in the ballot clerk binder.
It's not in the ballot clerk binder, but it goes in the green folder.
Right.
Yes. And we'll come and get them periodically because it can get pretty fat. So you will have a green folder in the red binder.